on the computer.
Yeah.
Okay, home slice. Let's see if we can make a show. You ready to go?
Sure.
3, 2, 1. And here we are, folks, again with the Solar Coaster with Jason Burkhart in Osaka, Josh Porter here in Maui. We get a chance to talk about wind today. What do you think about wind, Jay?
Good morning. Let's give everybody gas.
Gas gear acquisition syndrome. That's our favorite excuse to buy stuff. Yeah, I want to buy a windmill to power my studio. Yeah, no, it's a cool show we got here. We actually, I remember when we were talking about this, Jay, we were like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get Vineyard Wind on the show? You know, we were like talking about it earlier on, and then of course Vineyard Wind pops up, and we got Andrew Doba, chief
That
comms
just keeps
guy.
happening. It's like when we first started the radio, it was like, we really would like to talk to these people. We're going to talk to those people. We talk to everybody at this point.
A lot of people,
They're lining up.
And for people that, and also special kind of conversation because first of all, it's kind of seems like the beginning of offshore big mega scale wind in the United States right now. It's something that's been happening in Europe for the last decade and change. Now we're seeing this birth of an industry, so to speak, here in the US. And that is awesome. But in addition to that, we were out. I mean, this is your hometown, basically. You're from Plymouth. This is the general vicinity that you're in. It's off of New Bedford, I think, right? And then that lease out there for Vineyard Wind is kind of like between Nantucket or like, I'm not sure if south is the right orientation, but I think it's south of Nantucket and Martha's, right? In between them. Yeah. And then, of course, we did shows at Cuddy, which is just around the corner from that area. So it's right in your stomping grounds that this really awesome thing is happening. And as it turns out, it's not just there. It's other places. We're hearing echoes of it here in Hawaii. We're going to talk in news and events about some stuff happening in the Carolinas. I'm sure the Gulf Coast is right around the corner. California is even on the docket in a sense. So, man, it's a cool industry, and I'm really excited about it. And what say you on wind, Jay?
Necessary piece of the puzzle. We're talking about, this is something I was going to get into later in the show, but I mean, there's no one stop solution, right? If things work in different solutions work in different locations, right? And it's very location dependent. So what resources do you have available? How can you leverage them? How can you do it with at least environmental impact or human impact, whatever your priorities are. There is no one solution. And so wind is going to be a big piece of the puzzle. It's really easy to generate. It doesn't necessarily track the same as solar. So when we talk a lot about solar's intermittency, the sun is not shining, but the wind is still blowing. So you can get different resources at different times of day. It's just going to help everybody balance in the long term.
Yeah. My mind kind of breaks things down these days into intermittent and dispatchable. That's Josh's head.
Yep.
And this is obviously an intermittent source, but you can hear people discussing in the wake of what's happening with Putin and Russia and Ukraine. How do we diversify our energy? How do we create better energy independence? How does energy security has kind of a different flavor to it than energy security during an outage? Now the idea is, geopolitically speaking, how do we have secure energy and make sure we're okay? And Musk's out there saying, hey, you're not going to be able to take everything onto renewables right now. He's saying ramp up nuclear. He's saying ramp up our fossil fuel capacity so we can actually have, be a surplus provider of fossil fuels in the United States. And that's coming out of his mouth right now. And I'm talking to people in this space that don't disagree.
Technology so we can continue to do what we're doing with less impact, that type of stuff.
Sure. It's a transition, right? It's not this simple black or white, this or that. It's what is the geography? What is the technology that makes sense? What pencils in that space? How do we get enough of the solid intermittent that pencils in that space, enough of the solid dispatchable that pencils in that space? What's that?
What can we manufacture today?
What works now? And what can move us towards a carbon-free future? That's kind of the type of discussion we're having. So, of course, we're going to get a chance to talk to Andrew Doba from Vineyard Wind about that awesome interview. That will be up and coming shortly. Let's jump into news and events. I know hydrogen is a big part of the puzzle today, Jay. Are we talking about hydrogen right out of the gate?
Hydrogen is a big part of the conversation, but right away I want to talk, this is sort of a PSA, but this is a Hawaii Public Radio article, which is interesting, about misinformation derailing projects. And it's kind of that social media is the devil kind of conversation. Realistically, it's just very difficult to parse out the facts from the rhetoric and just people being afraid of things. There a lot of people will type a lot of things on a lot of keyboards, and it isn't necessarily true, factual, or even well thought out. I went down the rabbit hole on this one a little bit last
And
night.
Jay, just so people can read this if they want, this is the misinformation is derailing renewable energy projects across the United States by NPR and HBR.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. It's an NPR article. But there are, when a project comes into a city, there are invariably going to be proponents and opponents to the project. People don't like change, first of all, but there are legitimate reasons for wanting to site a project in a particular location, and people maybe not wanting it. That not in my backyard is a legitimate phenomenon. They certainly are behind renewable energies, but not where they can see it. And so it's a difficult conversation to have. The problem is that people make up all sorts of lovely, interesting, and really some wacky fake research or fake news, whatever you want to call it, disinformation.
That's
that
fake news.
Pardon?
I was just thinking about Trump. I hadn't heard the term fake news since he was off air.
Yeah, please stop.
It's gonna miss it.
All of a sudden, all the news is real again. It's not fake. But I mean, this is specifically in reference to the wind conversation, because they're saying that a lot of these windmills are generating low frequency noise, and they have all sorts of crazy effects. Now, I don't discount the fact that they make noise. I mean, just any mechanical component makes noise and has vibrations. Of course, obviously, they want to minimize that, because any vibrations that you're creating are actually damaging or shortening the lifespan of the machine, right? You don't want a machine that's shaking itself apart. So they try to make them as smooth as possible, just as a matter of course. They want these things to be able to last for a while. At least we would assume so.
Yeah.
But some of these reports are pretty crazy. What was the one you brought up before, the stilted Portuguese horses, whatever?
Okay, I'll read the quote. Links to stories about wind turbine noise causing birth defects in Portuguese horses.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so out there. And it's but people not being able to sleep. The wind shadow thing is actually legitimate. I thought about this, and
it's real.
At certain times of day, if a windmill is close to you, you will have it pass in front of the sun and just literally create a strobing pattern. Most of these don't move very fast, so it's going to be a pretty slow.
Yeah, it's not you don't want that in your life.
That's not like that. But there have been reports about people having seizures from flashing, flashing lights.
Yeah, it seems like an epilepsy.
None of those reports have ever been validated.
Well, so okay, so what I get out of this,
the cycle needs to be much faster than that. We had that what was the Japanese cartoon years ago, the Pokemon cartoon.
I remember that.
They had kids having seizures all over the country because they had a certain cycling pattern of flashing lights on the TV, and all the kids were watching it. But it needs to be much faster than your tradition. I mean, it really have to be a windmill kind of effect. So I don't see that being valid, but people believe it because it's on the internet.
Yeah. So look, this is a broad-reaching issue that impacts us right here in Hawaii. Okay. When you remember Pa'iahu, the 15 meg above Maui Meadows on the south area of Maui, for folks that aren't familiar with the geography of Maui, below Kula, there was a whole outspoken group that didn't want the solar farm there. And the types of stuff that was being researched, and they actually had, one of the groups had asked me to get involved with the research at one point, and they said, can you help us kind of show that EMFs are going to be negative for our health being within a couple 100 feet of this solar farm? And I thought, well, I can't imagine any scientific paper of legitimacy that actually can prove that, so there's a series of other types of things like that are out there. Really what this is, in my view, is that you have change. People are adverse to change,
Yep.
and but then there are consequences to not taking these steps, mainly climate change and mainly energy volatility, and there's other negatives that they're not really thinking about. And it feels like some of these people have a little too much time on their hands, you know. And but that being said, there are legitimate things. And when we spoke with Goldwyn as an example, I think the second in one of these articles we see here, it's the second largest manufacturer or highest volume manufacturer in the wind industry in the large turbines. Now, Goldman CEO David Sale, he spoke directly to me about that particular issue, about the shadowing effect and about the strobe-like effect. And they have technology embedded into their systems that they are innovating to minimize or reduce that. And they have these great little video infographic things that show exactly how the sun tracks around the windmill relative to the community, and how they turn the things off and they let them bleed through wind until it stops, right? Until they're outside of the shadow of the thing. So there's technology to address that particular issue, right? And of course, that's not going to make it into the rhetoric, So because that could be brought into it and say, hey, look, you can put this wind farm over here, but we have to make sure that these relevant new technologies are in place and that they preserve, a healthy space for us, right? So it's like it's media, man. It's just crazy media.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, is that when you are confronted with somebody ringing your doorbell and saying, oh my God, they're putting this thing in and please sign our petition not to have it, just do your own due diligence. I'm not telling you what to think. I just want you to do your own thinking, as opposed to just believing what's put in front of you on your Facebook group because somebody on a keyboard somewhere wrote it down.
I'll tell you what, Jay, it's not a small thing. It concerns me. And it concerns me because there's money behind some of this, right? There are groups and organizations that are in the anti-wind or anti-solar or anti-whatever kind of, I'm going to say lobby, but they're out there saying, hey, we are against this. And then there's attorneys that are going to have to litigate, and those attorneys are getting fees. And then there's negotiations, and there's out of course settlements, and there's money changing hands. And what it feels like is a bit of a shakedown, if you want my personal opinion. I'm from Jersey. That looks like a shakedown. So it looks like a legal shakedown. And, I don't want to see, and I'm really concerned about Hawaii in particular. We're not talking about too much wind here, but there is some wind. But in Hawaii, and our systems being able to be actually deployed within the time frame that we thought we did the hard work. We got through the legislature, we got the technology, we got the funding, we got it approved for the PUC. The utility said okay, and then boom, we get to this place, and then there's a shit ton of NIMBYs out there going, no, no. That's concerning, man. That's concerning.
Yeah, and it's always going to happen, but it only takes one dedicated individual to stir up just a tremendous amount of trouble. And like I said, there are legitimate concerns. There should always be oversight. I mean, you don't want people just dropping things in your backyard without any say whatsoever. Sure. But like I said, all I'm saying is do your own due diligence. Don't just believe it because somebody comes over and says, oh my God, the aliens are coming to pick us up in a week. And let's all
do you remember when we got called out on air for saying the word NIMBY, and it was what did she say? It was a negative word, and I had never thought of it as a negative word.
Derogatory. I don't
think derogatory. That was the term.
It's just a way of describing that knee-jerk reaction. And they said, I mean, I feel it too. I don't like change. I don't want anything that's going to have a negative impact on my property values, like or my sight lines, whatever it happens to be. But again, we're going to have the conversation that these things do need to happen and they have to go somewhere. So what do we all want to do about it? And that's all the conversation that I want to have.
Gotcha. Yeah, just a reasonable dialogue.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, Jay. You're gonna have to.
In a different reasonable dialogue, you want to talk about Heliogen before we get
Oh,
into
Heliogen. Why do I like Heliogen so much? There's something about Heliogen that just I'm always
you like
excited to
fried
see them
chicken?
in the news. I think it's because it's industrial scale. What did you say? I missed what you said.
You like fried chicken?
I like fried chicken. What's that? Oh, geez. You're talking about bird flares?
Bird flares. No,
Okay.
that's so now that's playing right into the previous article. So Heliogen and Woodside announced a California commercial scale demonstration project is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This was reported in Energy Source Distribution. It's actually really interesting because Woodside is an Australian electric provider and fossil fuel provider specifically. So these guys are heavy into the Western Australian market. They are selling fossil fuel solutions across the industry there, and this is part of a deal that they have with Heliogen to be exclusive in the Western Australian market to sell the Heliogen products going forward.
Okay.
So this is the demonstration, but it's going to happen in the Mojave Desert in
I
California.
want to go check this thing out.
Absolutely. The issue is they don't have permitting yet. Woodside has already told Heliogen, go ahead and start procuring materials, but they actually don't have permitting for this site yet. And I foresee a significant backlash in the wildlife preservation thing, specifically because of the bird flare.
So
kind
wait,
of
wait. Let me recap.
This is a concentrated solar system. They use AI to target a bunch of mirrors up to a central tower, heat that to well over 1,000 degrees, and then charge a like a heat battery that's just a bunch of rock in a box. But then they can use that as a much more stable ballast. But this is right outside the Mojave National Parks.
There are a couple of CSPs out there already. The ones you see when you come back from
They have
Vegas.
golden eagles, red-tailed hawks, the roadrunners out
Right.
there. I don't think roadrunners are up in the air like that.
Why would you choose
Wrens.
California?
Yeah,
too difficult.
But they're, I mean, the national parks, I'm on the national parks website right now,
Uh-huh.
and they're already reporting a 20.9 fewer bird species concerns.
Oh, right.
And now they want to put this concentrated solar bird killer thing right outside. It's going to be a misinformation storm. Just wait for it.
So let me see if I understand this. You got a bunch of shooting from the hip Australian energy entrepreneurs that want to lock in a exclusive distribution deal or exclusive deal in Australia. They're coming out to California saying, what's the big deal, mate? We should be able to do whatever we want here. And then they're going to go to California. I wonder if I know these guys. And then they're going to go to California, going to try to set up a CSP thing right next to like a bird sanctuary or something.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty close. It's pretty close.
That's wild, man. But I'll tell you what, the thing that just gets me really jazzed about Heliogen and about, what you have is like you said, there's this AI that super accurately or optimally controls the mirrors to change the overall energy harness of your typical CSP. And then it creates this superheated molten salt with core or whatever the technology is, and now you're able to utilize that heat for industrial purposes. And I think that's probably why I get stoked about it. It's just exciting to think that we're moving outside of, one aspect of this industry is moving to a new area, right?
Yeah. That's not the only interesting thing about the Heliogen setup, though, is that they also have this big, I mean, essentially, it seems really simple when you look at it, but all the best ideas are really simple, right? It's basically just a big container full of rock. And you think about like lava rock in your barbecue or something like that, it holds the heat and distributes it and keeps it for a while, even if you shut off the gas or whatever.
Yeah.
It's essentially a big giant box of rock that they pump the salt through, and then it will maintain heat ballast. Even when the sun goes behind a cloud or it's dark, they still have heat throughout those intermittency periods, and they can continue to run the generators. They can continue to draw heat off of that system. So they're overcharging this big box of rocks and then using that heat. So it's like a heat battery that's attached
a certain kind of rock
system directly, which is really neat. It's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it carbon?
Yeah, let's find out. You know, it
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah, it should be,
We'll
right?
put all the carbon in a box.
Yeah. You just got to attach the air capture system right to it, and then air capture right into
Well,
rock
yeah,
carbon.
I see. I love that whole conversation. It's like everybody's like, "Oh, we'll just pump the carbon up underground, and then we need to find a way to turn it solid." Oh, okay. You just want nature to do that for you, or how is that gonna happen? But
Really
if
cool.
if
CEO
they can
Meg
literally lock in a
O'Neill.
whole lot of carbon, I mean, that would be a major selling point, sure.
So she says our collaboration with Heliogen on this innovative technology supports our commitment to building a low cost, low carbon, profitable, resilient, and diversified portfolio. That's not interesting. I thought she was going to say something better. Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
So
Okay.
the video on Heliogen's website is actually pretty clear, and what I do like about it is that it's modular. You can add stuff. You can even add
Yeah.
electrolyzers if you want to do hydrogen production, like right on site, which is
Oh,
neat.
wow.
Yeah,
Huh. Wonder if that
do check
changes
that
things
out.
for hydrogen production in terms of efficiencies.
And that was a good segue, because now we're going to talk about hydrogen and hydrogen. I mean, it's pretty much
Hydrogen,
everywhere in the
hydrogen.
news these days, because I mean, I guess it's because it's a commodity that people can understand. You know, it's
Not
just
until
a
recently.
sure. I mean, 5 years ago, we were walking out on the trade show, and I was, you know, I've always been a hydrogen
Yeah, he
proponent
loved it.
in one way or another. But we're walking around trade shows, and like hydrogen is like segregated in this little corner way over there. There's like a taped line that says if you step over the line, and these poor guys, you know, they were over there. They had their tanks and
Yeah,
their manifolds, and
yeah.
this one guy's got a actually, I mean, it was slick tech where he's talking about gaskets for hydrogen connections,
Because
because
it's
you
such a small
think of hydrogen,
particle.
yeah, super small molecule. It can permeate a lot of materials, and it's very difficult to stop
Right.
leaks without the right material. And he had great stuff, but just like nobody's over there, and nobody was talking about it. Now, those guys need. I feel really vindicated, but those guys should be should feel way better now. Being at 5 years ahead of the curve, that's painful, hard to hopefully they're still in business.
For sure.
But we've got a lot of articles. First, like from oilprice.com, and I thought this was funny because like there's literally a .com for everything, isn't there? Oil price. Where do you even find this stuff? How hydrogen will transform geopolitics, and it's a good read on how we're currently tied to a few oil producing nations, and we can't really get out from under these relationships so long as we're economically tied to the said regions.
Yeah.
And that whole landscape is going to change. That's all the article is about. It's just like, you guys need to be paying attention, because the landscape is changing, and there's not much you can do to stop it.
Wow,
But
it's pretty. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no worries. It's just it's going to become much more level as a playing field. You know, you have these traditionally,
Yes,
Hawaii, for example, traditionally consumer nations,
it could
consumer
flip it on its
states,
head.
that now all of a sudden have the power to become a not only just self-sustaining, but actually an exporter of
An
energy.
exporter. This is an energy exporter, Hawaii. I love it. So, this is real Chuck Collins Hawaii Hydrogen Alliance stuff, right? He's like,
Mm-hmm.
we just got to go hydrogen, and he's
Yep.
got everything in there. But this says in January 2022, the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, released their anticipated report, Geopolitics of the Energy Transformation, the Hydrogen Factor, anointing it as the missing piece of the clean energy puzzle. And what you just talked about is the transition for geopolitics in the global economy. So we have this, this kind of known century-old, geopolitical relationship with these oil-producing countries that kind of dictate geopolitics globally for all of us, right? And now
Yep.
that could be completely changed by the smallest element in the universe. It's like, isn't that spectacular?
Nice way to phrase it. But I mean, it's just that it's available to most states. And by
But it's
states,
more
I mean,
available to some. And you just mentioned that about Hawaii. So
yep,
places with abundant intermittent renewable
yep,
energy now have the opportunity to harvest that and then to create hydrogen, and then potentially to even export it. I mean, generally renewable energy is available all around the world. So I wonder if it's moving hydrogen around. I would like to see the economics of all that. But I mean,
there are companies out there that already have sites on large scale, like basically just tankers that move hydrogen instead of oil. I mean, it's already happening. So
yeah, and then how was it? Hitachi, I think. Well, I met these guys out here, and they were talking about Southeast Asia because there's hydrogen can come from all these different forms. We've talked about the rainbow of hydrogen. They're moving more towards Michelle Detweiler's description, more towards a carbon character per hydrogen, like a metric, like a X amount of carbon per the hydrogen that's created, rather than a color, because the color kind of speaks to a range and it's a little blurry as to what it means, whether it's blue or green or gray or pink or whatever, teal, turquoise hydrogen, all these different things. But I mean that, you have oil refineries, and they're a source of potential hydrogen. And then I think Hitachi was moving it, and the way you move hydrogen is an interesting conversation too. You can change the state of the hydrogen to something else some way. Very cool. So this stuff is actually happening right now. Unbelievable.
It sure seems. I mean, the war in Ukraine has really kind of put this to the forefront. Everybody's talking. I mean, these things were in conversation, but as we've always said, the technology kind of exists. It's a policy desire problem.
Yes.
So once it becomes politically okay to say we're doing this thing, or then it's going to happen.
It's amazing how the human brain works like that, right? It just needs the right time. Can't do,
whatever that input is. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So talking about another one, we were talking last show about the 4 test hydrogen hubs in the Midwest, and the West Virginia proposal has come under a lot of fire, calling it a boondoggle. Now this is one that I'm not particularly thrilled with. Like hydrogen, don't like the blue hydrogen, or worse, gray, because that is basically just burning natural gas in order to create the hydrogen. You basically throw some steam into the mix when you're burning the natural gas, and it will break the water molecules of that steam apart, and you get the hydrogen out. It uses the oxygen to burn, and you can try to capture carbon. They talk a lot about this CCUS sus.
What's that? What's the name of it?
The carbon capture.
Carbon capture.
CCUS.
This is the Weirton Daily Times article we're talking about, right?
Pardon?
The Weirton Daily Times article.
Yeah, Weirton Daily Times. So coming out of West Virginia. But it is the whole concept of wanting to use the natural gas. I mean, you think if it's West Virginia, they would really like to get off the fossil fuels, but I guess they still want to leverage what they've got. Sure. It just takes so much energy. The problem I have is that the CCUS process is where you're trying to pump it underground and hope it goes away. I mean, it reminds me of fission waste. Nuclear waste. Honestly, when you're talking about nuclear waste, right?
Yeah.
We'll just stick it down this abandoned mine shaft and hope it disappears. No.
So this group here, the CCUS is the, what do you call it? Carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so they're basically trying to find ways to deal with the carbon that comes out of this particular method of achieving of harvesting hydrogen.
Yep.
And so this is like a research institute or something. They're trying to find ways to do this. It sounds like clean coal.
It kind of reminds me of that as well. Yeah, exactly. There are technologies that can do carbon capture off this type of ignition system, right? So you can get the carbon, you can capture it, you can do it, but it takes so much energy. And when I'm looking at
It's
like
very inefficient, you're saying.
total system, yeah, the efficiency of the total system, how much of the energy that you are generating are you going to have to then use just to capture the carbon, and what's the net output? Where's the Q factor?
Yeah. Do we know what that math is?
Not offhand.
Yeah.
I mean, it really depends on what technologies they're putting in, and then of course there's the gray where they just burn it off and nobody cares.
Right. Well, what occurs to me on the kind of other side of that is that you have these, let's call them, states where they have this cottage industry and all the infrastructure is there to support that existing industry. And once again, it's kind of like, on a local basis, what pencils out, what works for you to move in the direction of renewable energies, right? And this is, one of the kind of more egregious like examples. Okay, you're going to go and you're going to burn this gas and you're going to pull hydrogen. It's not going to be clean, but it's going to be, a little bit better than the alternative.
Well,
maybe
we can clean it is what they're saying.
Right. It feels like the
But
tree.
anyway, I mean,
Burn the
at
trees
the
and
end
then we'll plant the trees. It'll be okay. I mean, net zero
yeah,
carbon
right.
in there.
Yeah.
Right.
I've told that story too many times. But I mean, at the end of the day, this was a money conversation. There's $9.5 billion in federal funding.
That's where the boondoggle comes in
to build this hub. So West Virginia wanted that money in the worst way, and that's what they're building.
Did they get it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's I'm assuming they build the thing, but it's in law. It was signed into law.
No kidding.
So it's done.
You can get 9.5 billion for creating something like that?
Apparently. Yeah, right. So to continue the conversation on hydrogen, MSN reports that the Russia invasion has made energy security a hot topic. Really?
No kidding.
It's like,
you don't say.
But US thinks hydrogen could be the answer, and this is still kind of the same conversation. There was a big the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Forum in Dubai. Was it 2 weeks ago? I believe. With really interesting conversation. These are some backdoor kind of conversations. Real oil executives from real high-end companies talking about the future of the energy industry. These are the guys at the helm of this 100-year-old geopolitical structure that we've built, and they're talking about where they're going to go next. There's a lot of hemming and hawing. There's a lot of quotes in here, little sound bites. I would encourage everybody to read the article when you can. Russia's invasion has made energy security a hot topic on MSN.com. But the one that I really thought was interesting was the Italian. Was it Italian? I believe it was Italian. But the guy's name is Jafar, which I thought was hilarious because isn't that the bad guy?
Oh,
in Aladdin. But he's actually he seems really smart. CEO of Crescent Petroleum. So the hydrogen is a fundamental carrier of energy. Absolutely spot on. Okay, it's not the only one, but it is a fundamental carrier, and that it is not the only solution. So exactly what we were just talking about as well is that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all situation. Like everybody wants to immediately, well, just make everything hydrogen and everything will be okay and we don't have to worry about Russia anymore. It doesn't work that way in the real world. And he's telling all these other CEOs and billionaires, listen, it's not going to be that. So let's look at the whole picture. That's the smartest thing I saw coming out of this conference.
It was the smartest thing you saw coming out of it. Yeah. Well, I don't know what to say about that, Mr. Burkhardt. I mean, I certainly think that that hydrogen is it's obviously like has a tremendous promise, but the notion that it's going to just immediately shift over is absurd. It's going to take time to get there. There's going to be a lot of different ways to approach it.
About it. Like all of a sudden, we're investing $6 million $6 billion into hydrogen hubs or this, whatever. That.
I'll tell you what, one of the things that I find interesting, just very simply, is that let's say 3 or 4 years ago, we were hanging out with Hank Rogers and he was talking about hydrogen. He was excited in his lab over in Big Island, and he would pump hydrogen through a little burner, and you could put your finger next to it because it burns differently. And you would talk about the rate that at that point, it was, if you brought hydrogen up, it was still like there's a marked difference in the way people respond to hydrogen today than how they did 4 or 5 years ago. But it takes a while. And then it was just, it blows up, it's dangerous. I mean, that was it. That's all you got when you talked about hydrogen 4 or 5 years ago.
Hindenburg.
Hindenburg,
Remember we brought that up to the
Hindenburg.
guy at the trace, and he wanted to walk away from the interview. It's like, how many times do you have to answer that question?
Exactly. So it's but it's changed, and that is, I think, for me, the most interesting thing. Like, what is it about the way that humans think about these things? They just stick to something, and it takes a while of dialogue and information, and a lot longer than we expect
Sure.
for people to be able to say, yeah, let's look at this as a real solution. And then now we're starting. Now it's like everyone loves it. Now it's like it kind of swings. The pendulum swings to the opposite side, where it's like we're going to shift everything to hydrogen. And it's like, wait a second, no. And this is where this guy's coming in. It's going to take some time here, guys. Chill out.
Yep.
We're working on it. Crazy. All right. How
And
many more you want to get in
the
before we jump over to the main
not
focus?
hydrogen related. Fine, Rennie.
Yeah. Which one?
The U.S. Is now considering tariffs on solar panels from other southeastern countries.
Southeast Asian countries.
Southeast Asian countries.
Gotcha.
Now this is in response to, I mean, it's kind of, we knew this was coming, and I think we talked about it years ago when the tariffs first went on Chinese panels. The Chinese manufacturers would just move to some other country and stamp made in Malaysia or Taiwan or whatever else.
Transshipment
on the origin stamp, and that's what's happened. And so now companies in California are protesting this as well, because these companies are like wholly owned subsidiaries of major Chinese outfits. It's very obvious that it's just them trying to circumvent the tariff. But this is just a research request for the court. So it's not.
What is the periodical? I can't seem to find it.
This was an MSN as well. U.S. to consider tariffs on solar panels made in Southeast Asia.
Got it. People having had some experience in the sourcing world, Jay, can tell you that the salaries, the labor costs in mainland China and the special economic development zone and the infrastructure and the development of these factories and like all the fabs that were built for these things, like there was a movement towards Southeast Asia in general because it was cheaper to make it than it was to make it in China, right? Mm-hmm. For a lot of different technologies and new products, but I can see that has happened for PV. And so, basically China's out there and they're just, probably building fabs in different areas that have favorable policies. And, it's good for those environments. People get jobs, but it's basically just a bit of a
US.
What's that?
Chinese owned factories in the U.S. supplying jobs, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. The local economy gets a major boost. They have a big factory there. A lot of people get to go to work every day.
You're talking about Vietnam, for example.
Manufactured in the U.S.
But if it were done in the U.S., I think there's a case.
It's just pretty rare.
There's a case for domestic manufacturing in the United States from an energy security perspective. Maybe, right? We talked about this. By the way, I realized we have this huge interview with Andre about this issue, about a variety of things, because he covered for North America Smart Energy Week. He covered PV as a overview of the breakdown of how the PV technologies work, but he also went into depth about manufacturing and a variety. We're going to air that shortly.
For those who don't know, Andre is.
Andre Richter is a former Meyer Burger VP or high up staff member. Meyer Burger is one of the leading tooling manufacturers for the PV industry. And he is now, Meyer Burger changed hands. It moved, I can't remember the direction it moved from one European country to the other. But he basically moved on to create his own company called Blue Green Power. And he's doing some really exciting things in agrovoltaics. And very, very cool stuff. And we'll cover that in that interview. I love this stuff. It really is just amazing. I don't even know if we talked about it, Jay. It's just radical. Think, light polymer or like plastic encased bifacials hung by cables over farm environments to deal with the effects of climate change, meaning soil and water problems and water evaporation and soil erosion, to kind of mitigate that problem, keep the crops moving good, but then create new revenue streams through PV. Just real Andre
Nice.
Richter stuff, man. So
Sounds like a fun time.
oh yeah, it's what's more fun than that? But the reason I bring it up, and I almost lost it, was he's talking about a case for domestic manufacturing of panels in the United States. Not so much from a geopolitical security kind of thing, although I think that's reasonable to discuss, but more from, hey, this is possible. And there's new manufacturing techniques where it could be profitable and it could make sense. And there's this hub and wheel and spoken hub fab location strategy and geography that he mapped out for the entire United States, and the consequence on the jobs. We talk about hundreds of thousands of jobs, even in fully roboticized kind of factories. So
yeah, but I mean, at that point, they are good paying, high tech, stable jobs, not transitory construction work.
Yeah, and it all hinges upon the idea of microclimate specific value proposition of domestically produced
we talked about
PV panels.
That, which is actually a really, really neat conversation.
It is super cool.
Tailoring your solar panels to the environment they're going to be deployed in, instead of just buying an off-the-shelf one that may not be optimal.
Yeah, and you have there's a carbon debt conversation too, because you're moving these things around the world with all these big nasty ships. So you eliminate that, you get a carbon benefit, you get a job benefit, and if you can do it and make it pencil, because the products, and make it actually, you need to have it perform better, right? And that can only happen from a local geographic manufacturing position or standpoint. So tariffs on Southeast Asian factories. I don't know, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it's not a tariff yet. It's not law. It's just they're doing an inquiry to find out whether this really is a circumvention. But I think it's pretty obvious that they're going to find, these are all just wholly owned Chinese companies that with a different stamp, and that's going to be a thing. You want to talk to Vineyard Wind?
Let's talk to Vineyard Wind. All right, so this is Andrew Doba, great guy. Comms officer basically over there at Vineyard. And if for those of you who haven't heard about Vineyard Wind, they're basically the company that is pioneering offshore wind in the United States. And that is something that is just, we've been working on, we meaning our society has been working on offshore wind for a long time. We didn't have the political support to make it happen. This is decades long process. And not only does it come to fruition this summer while we were out in Plymouth, by the way, but they had, remember, I think we were in DC when they put the article out and they showed the union labor event. And they were talking about how they just signed the biggest union labor deal for energy projects in the United States. So awesome stuff. The feds are well behind it, and right on the heels right now of major leases across the New York corridor. And we're going to talk about the Carolinas in a little bit afterwards. Let's go right over to Andrew Doba of Vineyard Wind with the Haliexes over in New Bedford.
Well, my name's Andrew Doba, Director of Communications for Vineyard Wind. I've been working in various phases for the company for a little more than 2 years now. It's a really exciting company to be involved in, and a very exciting project. It's not often you get a front row seat for the launch of a brand new industry, but that's just what we have here, with this project and this company. And it's really exciting. For every milestone we pass, we're breaking new ground, and I'm not trying to, throw every cliche in the book at you right now, but I mean, it really is true. I mean, we've gotten further than any other offshore project in the country's history has gotten. So it's exciting. We are looking at installing 800 megawatts of offshore wind power, about 15 miles off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. In terms of visibility, we've taken every care to make sure that these are there's as little impact as possible. And, on most days you will not see them. I suppose on a, really clear fall day, you might, but big reason why the area was chosen where the wind farm is going is that they're far away. They're not going to be, they're not in anyone's backyard.
And
they're
when you
going to
say, if I may, when you say visible, and I didn't mean to start off on that particular topic, but I am interested in that. Do you mean visible from Martha's exclusively? Because I can't imagine that you'd be able to see it from the mainland or from Cuddy.
I mean, you're talking, I believe it is, it's more than 20 miles
Right.
off the coast of the Cape.
Right.
So, I mean, if there's any visibility, it's going to be minuscule. And we've taken a number of steps to make sure that it's even, one of the things that, if you've ever seen, I mean, look, there's only 7 turbines in the water right now in the United States of America.
Those are the
2
Block
are
Island
off
ones, Orsted, right?
Yeah, 2 off the coast of Virginia that has been done by Dominion, and the 5 off of Block Island, which are owned by Orsted.
Right.
So if you've seen those, I mean, my family and I vacation not too far from there every year, and at night you can see the red lights on the turbines.
Right.
For the project that we're building, we're actually using a system called aircraft detection lighting system. And so those red lights are only going to be on something like 3 or 4 hours a year. And so, so even from that standpoint, I mean, the visual aspects is one that's, we've thought a lot about and is not going to have a big impact.
I'm sure. And I got to tell you, I'm like really excited to learn about the location, the power generation. When we think about wind, from the perspective of talking about solar all the time, solar batteries, this kind of world tends to be a big part of our talking points, right? But wind produced more energy in the renewable energy kind of section than solar last year in the United States, right? And so we have this tremendous resource, it's been around for a while, but it's making huge advances. And I want to understand some of those advances technically and how things get done. So tell us a little bit about the wind farm itself. You mentioned the location. What's the units that are going to be put in? How's it all fit together?
So I think a really good way to explain the technological side is to sort of somewhat highlight the path to getting to the point where we are right now has not always been, smooth sailing, to say the least. And so you might remember we were delayed by the federal government in 2019 before getting final approval. And as a result of that decision, we ended up having to go out to bid for all of our contracts because they expired. So initially we were going to be putting in 9.5 megawatt MHI Vestas turbines. But when that contract expired, we went out to bid it, and we ended up selecting the GE Heliogen X, which is a 13 megawatt turbine. Yeah. So, I mean, that jump right there, I think just from the necessity of hitting pause and then restarting and showing how much it's grown in that standpoint. I mean, and just what does that mean? So when we first applied for the project, we were looking at upwards of 108 turbines. When we made the selection of the Vestas, we were down to 84. And then once we selected the GE Heliogen X, we were down to 62.
So it allowed you to do less with the same amount of power, basically.
We're still generating the 800 megawatts, but with far fewer turbines. And it really just isn't, it's a perfect example of how much, how much the technology is growing by, every year at this point. In terms of other things about the project, I mean, we've adopted some fairly unique, there isn't going to be the wind farm that we're building is not going to look like any other wind farm in the world. We have, and the other developers in our area, which is known as the New England Wind Development Area. We've all agreed to use uniform 1x1 nautical mile spacing between our turbines, which will create a grid in the area and allow for transit lanes for vessels to get through, in these mile plus wide corridors. So that's one big factor, in terms of
just so you don't have to avoid a block of wind turbines. You don't have to reroute around it. It's actually set in a way where it doesn't impact shipping routes. Exactly.
And like I said, a huge, there's 200 mile wide corridors through every part of the wind farm.
Interesting.
So that's one aspect, and then just in terms of some particulars on the project, I mean, we're talking 800 megawatts. I mean, it's a lot of power. For context, up here in New England, they're talking about building a couple new natural gas plants. They're coming in at like 650 megawatts, right? So I mean, you're generating more power than even like the advanced gas plants are doing. Nice. And what does 800 megawatts mean? So it's enough power for about 400,000 homes and businesses in the Commonwealth. It's the equivalent of, getting that power replaced with wind is the equivalent of taking 325,000 cars off the road every year. And the biggest factor, and I think what's driving a lot of the business, at least specifically on the East Coast, is that, more and more states are trying to adopt higher percentages in their renewable portfolio standards. And without offshore winds, the states, particularly in the Northeast where I live, without offshore wind, it's going to be very difficult to hit those targets, based on their decarbonization goals.
That's amazing. And I'll tell you what, from the perspective, I'm an East Coast guy. I grew up in New Jersey and live in New York. So, and lots of friends up in the Commonwealth, as you put it. Right. And so but I live here in Maui now, and we're
Must be really rough, by the way.
I,
Really rough.
I get that from East Coast all the time. So 100% renewable energy mandate, right, here in Hawaii, the first state to adopt that. And just to give you a sense of, I tend to think of offshore wind for Oahu, because while the other islands may be able to meet that mandate with solar and a combination of other deployments, I don't think Oahu. DBED recently did an analysis of the overall landscape, the topography, and they just could not locate enough solar to hit the 100% renewable energy mandate. It just wasn't there, whether it was a combo of, and they were modeling all different kinds of stuff, right? From rooftop to carports to everything. And so a conversation that's been emerging over the last couple of years has been offshore wind for Oahu to be able to meet that mandate. So just like you said about the Commonwealth, we've got a similar issue out here, just deployable space for the amount of power and energy you need. So that's really exciting. And I love the idea of 800 megawatts with 62 turbines. It just feels like mega scale, right? Tell us a little bit, if you can, about GE. I know Laval and the people over there did some amazing work with creating the Heliogen X. What can you tell us about your choice?
Well, I mean, it's the most powerful wind turbine on the planet. One rotation would power a home for 2 days. It's pretty crazy. I mean, I think one of the other real sort of advantages is, and this is the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast. On the East Coast, we obviously have the outer continental shelf, right? So our water is much shallower. We've got an ability to put turbines in, and the area that we're currently developing has been called by some the Saudi Arabia of wind.
I like it.
And, which was a great soundbite. I love that. So by working with GE, I mean, we're able to bring the most powerful turbine in the market into one of the best markets for wind, and hopefully set a really high bar for the industry. Now in the West Coast, I think by all accounts, and I'm less familiar around Hawaii, but certainly off the coast of California, you're looking more at floating, and that's in various stages of development. But just to put this into context, in terms of how much power we're talking about, right now on the East Coast alone, right? So if you were just to put turbines on the East Coast, there's estimated to be enough wind power to power 2 times the U.S. current baseload, and that's just on the on the East Coast. Yeah. Right. So the potential here, I mean, obviously you don't want to bottleneck and put them all in one spot, but potential on both coasts, once floating becomes, a bit more tested and is ready to roll, I mean, is the potential for generating clean electricity is really
so you see a huge opportunity for big wind, offshore wind, be it anchored or floating. Can I call those are the 2 designations, right? Or found. So right now, I understand we produce more wind than we do, more renewable energy with wind than with solar. So where do you see that growing? Have you thought about that in terms of the overall scope of the renewable energy mix in the next decade? Is that a conversation you have with the other brilliant people at Vineyard Wind and the big wind guys? I mean, what kind of conversations do you have in that room?
Well, I think if you were looking for that, the best place to look is really with the Biden administration and what they're doing. I mean, there are a number of lease areas currently under development. You've got projects like Kitty Hawk, in the Atlantic Coast region. As I mentioned, Dominion off of Virginia is looking at a massive installation there. So you're seeing a lot of progress based on existing lease areas, but the Biden administration just put out a plan a month or so ago to put out a number of new lease area options. So looking at further areas off of New York, some of the Gulf of Mexico, and California. And so the federal government really is going to be the driving force behind defining where the lease areas are and where we go, which is how we got to this point, by the way. I mean, if I can just, the reason the lease areas that we're currently talking about now that are in development, this process started in 2009. And initially the lease area that was proposed was 60% larger than what was actually what was actually finally signed off on. And then Vineyard was able to acquire a lease in 2015 and begin the process. So I imagine that they're going to be following a similar process, right? Going through identifying, public engagement's obviously a big component of all this. Refining what those spaces look like and then putting them out to bid. And I think what you're seeing right now, and just in terms of a financial standpoint, is, the banks, the financial community is clearly behind this. They see the potential here. And to me, that's one of the most positive aspects because, I think a lot of people in the renewables world know of Cape Wind. What I think a lot of people don't realize about Cape Wind is that it actually had all of its permitting. What it didn't have was the financing. And so, we've crossed that threshold. And I think you're seeing, I think we're just kind of hitting our stride at the exact right time in North America.
Right. So that institutional money's out there saying we're behind this. You have the policymakers behind it, and time has kind of come, right? So and it's very exciting. Can you just tell us what are the basic specs of the Heliogen? I know this is really a conversation from GE, but I'd love to know, the height, and that you mentioned it can one or two rotations and it can power a home. So what can you tell us about the system? I'm just trying. It's hard to get scale, right? You're trying to think about how big is this?
Well, I mean, so from the bottom to the top of the tower is basically it's the size of the Eiffel Tower is how large it is, and each blade comes under it's longer than a football field, almost as long as a football field goalpost to goalpost. It's about 6 yards shy of doing the whole football field goalpost to goalpost. So, I mean,
perfect. That makes sense. Now you go, I get the size of this. How do you go about building this? I understand there's certain kind of ships that are used for and during the construction process. What's the time frame? What does this process look like? Let's say you have your green light, whenever that is. I'd like to know when that is, and then what happens?
Well, I mean, we are in the stages of planning a groundbreaking. So just in terms of timeline, we'll have definitely you'll be hearing something on that in the near future. Nice. In terms of so we're starting onshore construction this year. It will continue into next year. We start offshore construction in 2023. First power comes onto the grid in late 2023, and then we finish construction in 2024.
Oh, so you're moving. I mean, you're.
Oh yeah. No,
This is just a couple of years away.
Yeah, no, we're moving, and now you're getting into sort of, we're doing quite a lot on workforce development. Just making sure that we've got the right workforce in place. We are, we signed the country's first project labor agreement for an offshore wind project back in July.
Yeah.
So 500 union jobs are going to be created as a part of this. We're getting the trades involved, apprenticeship programs, things of that nature. So we're trying to build that out. We're using the port in New Bedford, the Marine Commerce Terminal in New Bedford, as a construction and staging area. And essentially, the way that'll work is that the turbines will come in, they will be assembled in New Bedford, and then they will be brought back out to the water from there. And eventually, what you'll see on the construction side is these massive jack-up vessels. Ultimately, they'll be loaded with the materials. What they do is they go to the location, they have these long legs, they extend and basically go to the ocean floor and lift the boat out of the water. And then you have basically a crane platform that puts the jacket on, puts the blades on, and moves to the next location.
Oh man, I want to time lapse that. That sounds
same here.
Very good. And these are these being made in Europe? Did I hear that correctly with GE, that they have a prototype over maybe in Norway or something?
Yeah, there is one, I believe, in Rotterdam. I say. The exact locations I think are still being tinkered on GE's end. We did place an order, so they've got an order in hand for the turbines, but I think they're figuring some things out on their end.
Very good, very good. All right, so you got a 62 turbine, Heliogen, 13 megs a piece, roughly, right? 13 megawatts a piece, and going in over the next couple of years, huge advances. Are there any other points that you'd like to make sure we cover before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's it. Again, I just think it's it's an exciting point for the industry to be in. I think everybody on our team is anxious to kind of see where this goes over the next few years, and just in terms of it's been an idea for so long to sort of see it in reality, in the next several months. I think it's going to be pretty amazing. And we have people who have been involved in this industry, for going on 20 years. You have people on staff who have worked for Cape Wind. So, people have been doing this for a really long time. And I think, once we kind of get to that point, I think it'll be a pretty big milestone for not just us, but just the industry across the board.
There you have it, folks. Andrew Doba, Vineyard Wind Communications Director, right? And it's been a real pleasure to get the inside story on what's happening with the deployment of 62 13 megawatt Haliade-X's off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, changing the landscape of renewable energy in the United States right now. I think you said it best, Andrew. The front row seat to the redevelopment of the new show, right? So thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Please take us out there and let's do some recording with you in the future.
Sounds good. Definitely.
All right. Andrew Doba from Vineyard Wind. Really like that guy, the Saudi Arabia of wind. What do you think about that quote, Jay?
Saudi Arabia of wind actually sounds pretty good. Like I said, we both grew up on the East Coast. I know that area really, really well. Concerns about visibility is going to be a thing, but it looks like they've addressed most of them. I do have a serious interest in that aircraft detection kind of system, because they have to have the little indicator lights because when you're up in a low flying small aircraft, these things they look up like they're reaching up to grab you, right? And it can be dangerous. So that's why they have those indicators on all the big tall buildings, power poles, and of course these windmills that are going to be out there. This one looks like it's only going to work when there's aircraft in the direct vicinity. How it knows that, I have no idea.
I see.
It's really interesting. But pilots in the area are going to get to know that they're out there very, very quickly, and probably avoid the area.
Right.
Not only, it's generally not fun to fly over water anyway if you're in a small plane that's not equipped for water landing. But we'll see how that comes down.
You got me thinking about our trip this summer to Cuttyhunk when when Wes was like, "Hey, you want to go take a look at those windmills?" And when I was like, "Not that close, not that close."
But that's why it's really uncomfortable, right? They're actually
they're moving
right there,
and then
outside your window, and it's spinning.
I'm like, "Whoa, is that close enough?"
Yes,
we're not
that's
talking
close
like
enough, Wes. We're not talking like the glide path for Logan. We're talking about right there. Very scary. But yeah, so those indicators serve a real purpose, and I can see people being upset if they're just constantly out there flashing. But if it's an intermittent thing, or they only go off when they're required, that's nice and neat.
And I can't remember, but he probably references the Block Island turbines that are actually the first ones that are off the coast of the United States.
Yeah, he did.
And the annual cumulative time is like a very, very small amount of time.
3 to 4 hours.
We're talking about a red light
out of the entire year.
Yeah.
Not so bad. But this is part of the larger policy shift that we're seeing. So from the U.S. Department of the Interior, Biden-Harris administration announces wind energy lease sale offshore the Carolinas. So it's not just in New England.
And that just happened. Yeah, this is March 28th.
Just announced March 28th.
That's yesterday as of our recording. So this is huge. We're talking about 1.3 gigs of offshore wind energy, enough to power 500,000 homes. Love when they do the home conversion. But 1.3 gigs.
That helps a lot. I like to frame this type of stuff. Let's talk about that just for a second. So 1.3 gigawatts, like 1.5 times the Vineyard Wind installation. The lease area covers 110,000 acres.
Yeah,
and that's a lot of area out the at Carolina Long Bay area. But 500,000 homes, that's not a small number. But I want to frame that for people. So off of the U.S. Energy Information Administration website, I have data for 2020. I don't have data for 2021. And 2020 was a weird year anyway. But still, energy use for the U.S. was 3.8 trillion kilowatt hours. Now, I don't like the fact that they use the trillion number. I think they want it to sound really big, and so you put it in kilowatt hours. But we have megawatt hours and gigawatt hours for a reason. So doing the conversion, it comes down really easily. Just 3.8 million gigawatt hours. Now, what that means for everybody, like your average nuclear power plant is around 1 gigawatt. These wind farms are kind of playing in that realm where it's 800 megawatt hour, which is 800 megawatt, which is a little less than a nuclear reactor, or 1.3, which is a little more than a nuclear reactor. But I mean, they're all different.
Nuke is 1
but
gigawatt.
It's in that realm.
Yeah.
And basically what a gigawatt hour is if you run that, it's the amount of energy that comes out of that wind farm or that reactor in 1 hour. So if you're running at a gigawatt, you run for an hour, you get a gigawatt hour. That's all that means. So the US using 3.8 million gigawatt hour per year. We're going to need a whole lot more of these windmills. In fact, where was the data? I think we just surpassed 100 gigawatt rolled out per year.
One of our other
really
news
nice
articles.
Yeah. Year for wind. So that came from a Stockhead article, but we just, or almost 100, we're just about to pass 100 gigawatt per year. But that still means that at this pace, we need to be rolling out wind, if wind is the only source, for another 38,000 years.
I don't know.
In order to supply the US.
But we're talking about gigawatt hour consumption domestically, complete picture.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about power, because the way these things are rated, they're rated on power, right?
Right.
So then
how much you can get it in an instant.
Yeah. So you're saying that like it would require, did you say
at the current rate of deployment for wind, you need to be running, you need to be doing
what's the rate of deployment though? You mean like
years?
You mean 100 gigs per year?
100 gigs per year.
I gotcha. But how much is that 100 gigs produced in energy, not as a power figure, right? So it's like, what's the energy production of that 100 gigs annually? That would give us a better sense. I mean, so
it's just a lot. Like I said, it's a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things. People are thinking about this. You need to have those hours. It's actually not that. You have to divide by hours in the year. And
you know what I'd like to see? I would like to see this. When Andrew Doba talks about how our wind capacity, like the measured wind energy that's out there for our viable locations around the country, is a multiple of the US baseload. I would like to know what that looks like. Like, I would like to see how many windmills, what's the visibility, how does that play a role with the other intermittent sources and dispatchable sources? Like, I really want to start to see the United States as a net zero or as a clean energy grid, and what those technologies look like in their entirety. Like some modeling, I haven't quite seen that yet. If you go to Hoover Dam, they have these models of like how all the different energy sources work together, and they have examples of some windmills and different things, comparables. If you go to the US, and I mean, Hawaii here in D-bed, they talk about, the islands, these little tiny microcosms, right? And you can see exactly what's happening in terms of energy generation in a given grid for a given size. But the actual United States, I haven't thought about that before. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of a difficult conversation to have, because it's not even. The distribution of energy generation and consumption isn't even either.
You mean we got hot spots like New York and LA versus
big cities versus farmland.
There's a transmission conversation in there too.
Yeah.
Very, very cool stuff, man. Got me thinking here, buddy. All right. Do you want to talk about Europe a little bit? Is that where we're going?
Figure out those numbers.
Are we looking at Boris Johnson? Is that what's happening next?
Yeah. I mean, what's going on in the UK is pretty much mirrors what's going on in the US, right? Where we have these conversations. We need to get away from foreign energy sources, and they are even more subject to this, because regionally they're pretty close to Russia, so they get a lot of Russian. Most people don't know still that I've spent the majority of my career in IT. I've developed software for a company in England that their whole business was just importing Russian coal. That's what they did. And the software that I wrote was just so that they could measure, because they measured it by area. You know, they would just bring it in and it would just be this big giant pile. And they wanted to know how much coal was in a given area and which was going to which distributor, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just by meters of coal that they were bringing in. But that's what they did. And it is, because geographically they're right there, it was very a convenient energy source. But now it's become inconvenient for different reasons.
So, but basically, in this case, Boris Johnson is talking about bolstering nuclear and wind, given the current geopolitical situation.
And what it sounds like to me. So this is Energy Central article. But what it sounds like to me, he's basically got meetings lined up with everybody.
Right. What can you guys do?
He doesn't have the information, but he's doing his research. He's got meetings with the wind people. He's got meeting with the nuclear people, and he's got meeting with the solar people. And he's just gonna try to find whoever makes the best pitch, I guess, is going to get the majority of the government backing. But it sounds like he's entertaining all solutions, which is not a bad thing to do.
That seems to be the method of the day right now. It's like, okay, now that you guys have been talking about all this technology forever, now what can we actually use? Hey, let's jump over to the markets. Can we just wrap it up with the windy discussion? Is that okay?
Really quick, this was a cool one. You sent this over. The WNDY is the symbol for a relatively new ETF that specifically focuses on wind energy supply.
Yeah, it started only 6 months ago. 9/8/21 is the inception date, and they got 4 million in net assets. I mean, you can if you're talking about ETFs, the reason I was excited about this, Jay, is that we see wind. I mean, we're talking to Goldman, we're talking to Vineyard, we're talking to other guys. We're seeing what's happening out there in the leases, the Carolinas, like the New York corridor, the multi-billion-dollar eye-popping, I think was the term they used in the podcasters roundtable last week. So it's all happening. All right, well, how do we get involved with this? Well,
and lots
ETFs
of
are a great
money
way
up for grabs, right? So,
and ETF is it electronically traded fund? Is that what it is? Exchange traded fund or electronically traded fund? What is it? Exchange traded fund. That's what ETF stands for. We saw that. We played with that a little bit with TAN and PBR, I think, and it was kind of like baskets of different renewable energy stocks. But I was like, well, what's out there in the wind world? Because hey, man, this stuff's happening, and maybe this is our ticket to make a few bucks. So windy is one of the first ones that pop up. High growth potential. Who the heck knows? Forecast suggests the global market for wind energy could reach 127 billion.
Off, like I said, only 100 gig. That's kind of the message the reason why I brought all that data in before, is that if it's really taking off, we're really going to use wind as a serious generator of energy for our society. Then these companies that have been doing well already at this tiny fraction of our total energy consumption, they're going to have to scale, and they're going to have to scale big.
There you go. Sounds good.
That's kind of the conversation. The one downside for this particular ETF that I caught out is that it is predominantly weighted in China.
It's in terms of Chinese companies
investments. The U.S. almost doesn't make the list at only 1.9%. So it's not a very domestic for people that want to invest domestically. It is not too attractive for that. It's 40% approximately weighted in China.
So I'm looking at the net assets right now. You know what's interesting about this? So you have net assets. Northland Power is the highest, the biggest piece of that basket. But you have Ørsted, which we tried to get in touch with related to some of the projects recently over the summer. I also see in here Intergex. Intergex is the company that is working here in Hawaii and has won a lot of the bids for some of our solar plus storage systems, but I know they do a lot of wind and hydro as well. So it's cool. At least we can see some companies that we know of, but there's a bunch here. China, Mingyang, I suppose, Sonoma, they look like they're probably Chinese companies. So yeah, I see what you're saying, Jay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but they make it very plain. Obviously Hong Kong is part of China as well, so I don't know why they break that out quite separately. But
being hopeful.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It is a less attractive feature. of this particular basket.
I'll have to
So-
take a look at some of the other ETFs, maybe do a comparison. All right,
Sure.
folks. Well, that was Andrew Doba talking with Vineyard Wind. CEO Lars was really a great help in getting this interview together. I was actually chatting with Lars on LinkedIn, and he's like, okay, you got to do it, guys. Let's do it. So he was really helpful in getting us that interview. And I got to tell you, I really am excited to be able to talk more about wind, to see its impacts for the rest of the country, see the Carolinas, the New York, actually see the Vineyard Wind deployed out there in Cuddy and out by Cuddy and Martha's and Nantucket, all that great area.
You
We
just want to
love
go
that
back
area.
sailing.
What's that?
You just want to go back sailing.
Of course. I just want to hang out on sailboats and helicopters and do fun stuff and eat seagulls.
It is going to be interesting. And he said they're going to be rolling out fast. So
we got to get out there. And then who knows, maybe there's an opportunity for some pioneering of big wind here in Hawaii. So to me, it's a very exciting time. We're going to keep our eyes on this, and we're going to not only we've got a handful of other wind shows we'll be able to do. Goldwind is right up there, one of the largest manufacturers in the world. We have CEO David Sale, who'll be appearing in one of our upcoming episodes. All right, folks, thank you for tuning in. This has been the Solar Coaster. Aloha from Maui.
Have a good one.